Three Demons, Book 2, Chapter 12. Joseph versus Kazuto. Joseph and Kazuto stare one another down, waiting for the other to make the first move. Of course, Joseph is the one who does, rushing headfirst at Kazuto. Moron. Kazuto says to himself, placing his palms onto the ground, his bones shooting through out his arms into the ground as they travel through and stab Joseph in both of his feet, piercing through the arch and cutting through into his lateral ligament. In pain, Joseph screams out, "Damn it!" Kazuto appears in front of Kazuto, or Joseph, with a bone blade fully formed as he swings at Joseph, who uses his arm to take the blunt of the attack, leaving a deep cut into his arm, blood spurting from the wound. Joseph then goes to grab Kazuto, but he just jolts behind him and slashes him on the back, causing Joseph to step forward in pain due to the holes left at his feet. Joseph then grabs his wrist and opens his hand, a bright red ball of demon arcana forming in it. Kazuto rushing towards Joseph, looking to finish the fight, but Joseph turns back towards him. Demon shot! Joseph fires the ray of energy at Kazuto, forcing him to dodge the blast and leave himself open for Joseph to suffer through his foot pain and grab Kazuto by the throat and slam him into the 4-inch deep creek, Kazuto's head bouncing off the rocky, water-like surface. Joseph then proceeds to pummel Kazuto, each time his head bouncing off the ground until Kazuto grabs Joseph's wrist and sends a dense steel-like bone in between Joseph's carpal bones, leaving him unable to use his right hand. Kazuto then kicks Joseph off of him, letting him kip up and fires a bone by flicking his fingers at him. The bone just barely zooms past Joseph as he loses his balance. He then summons his gauntlet in his left hand as Kazuto comes running towards him to cut his throat. Joseph then rams his fist into Kazuto, creating a devastating explosion, catching them both in the blast. The smoke covers the battlefield for a solid minute before it disappears. Joseph and Kazuto both stand there, looking at each other. Their clothes burnt and torn, their skin lacerated in the burns from their blast, their skin visibly peeling off as they both twitch from the second-degree-like burns, as well as Joseph having his cut wounds that are just being toasted. When we realize this fight is pointless, you can knock me unconscious and I'd still find a way to leave. Kazuto screams out, "Shut the hell up!" Joseph screams back, running towards him and decking Kazuto in the face, catching them both at a second explosion. However, unlike last time, Kazuto doesn't waste any time. He then uses the smoke from the explosion to catch Joseph off guard and stabs him through the chest. Joseph coughs up blood onto Kazuto. But before he could do anything, Kazuto's blade splinters apart like branches on a tree and pierces the inside of Joseph's body, tens of small blades stabbing Joseph's internal body until they're piercing back through Joseph's body. Each blade stabbing through his intestines, slicing up his kidneys and liver, making his body look like a porcupine. Joseph vomits up a pool of blood and the blade is retracted back into Kazuto. Joseph falls over onto his knees, his entire body covered in blood as it quickly spills onto the ground. "Randy, if you don't stay down, I will kill you myself. No more playing hero. It doesn't suit you." Kazuto sternly warns Joseph as he continues to try to stand back. "Oh, fuck you," Joseph responds, his gauntlets disappearing. Kazuto then raises his blade once more, ready to cut Joseph down for good. Joseph then smiles at Kazuto. "Distraction!" Joseph spits out his tooth covered in blood right at Kazuto, even if he does dodge it easily, and he also found it childish. It did what Joseph needed as he stands back up, blood splurting out of all of his wounds as he grabs Joseph by his shirt collar and headbutts him, both of them falling onto the ground. Joseph then continuously bashes at his head against Kazuto's. "You aren't the only person who goes through shit. Why do you think I exist?" Joseph tells him in between headbutts, but Kazuto has a blade poking out of his head, stabbing Joseph each time a headbutt connects. Kazuto then plants his hands onto Joseph, stabbing into him, but Joseph fights through the pain, continuing to pummel Kazuto, even though both his kidneys are been stabbed, using his left hand to bash his head into the ground. Kazuto then squeezes his fists together. The blade lodges into Joseph's hand, splinters, and pierces the entirety of Joseph's hand, making it look like a porcupine. This was enough for Kazuto to kick Joseph off once more, and he then kicks Joseph across the head and sends him flying. skipping him across the creek like a rock. Kazuto looks around Joseph, notices how the blood painted across the battlefield has turned the water in the creek completely red. How is he still standing after losing that much blood? Kazuto thinks to himself before his heart skips a beat, causing him to stumble a bit. Joseph tries to take advantage, but his wounds prevent him from being able to do so effectively. Kazuto was then able to form a small bone cannon onto his right arm, aiming at Joseph before firing a blast of air at him. Joseph fighting to keep his balance, the razor-like wind tearing his skin apart, the bones in his cheek and arms now beginning to show as thick pieces of skin begins to fall off his body. Joseph only continues to stumble forward. Like I said, I'm not leaving. I'm going to beat some sense into you. He screams out before Kazuto fires another arconic blast at him, this time being snow and ice. The exposure to the cold begins giving Joseph instant frostbite, the blood on his body freezing and then cracking. Kazuto's not even letting up for a moment until he sees signs of Joseph slowing down. He then quickly moves towards him as soon as he does, summoning a blade in his free hand. Joseph then turns to him when he gets close. Bitch! Joseph then slaps Kazuto with his splintered right hand, leaving him screaming in pain, but also cutting Kazuto's face with his own bones. Kazuto, however, catches himself and aims his cannon point blank at Joseph. He fires a huge blast of fire at Joseph's entire body being torched as he rams his fist into Kazuto's cannon, plugging the hole and causing an explosion, scorching both of the two in the process. Joseph then grabs Kazuto, pulling him towards him as he continually beats him down again. I don't care how many times I've got to do this before you understand! Joseph uses his hand, his left fist, his head, his knees, to beat in Kazuto's face. Kazuto's face being a bloody mess, but not without giving Joseph a taste of his own medicine. Each time he was hit by Joseph, he lodged a dented bone into his body, slowing his movements. But Joseph has become so adamant about the fight, he tears his own joints and ligaments just to accomplish his goal. Kazuto is kneeling on the ground, Joseph grabbing his shirt collar before forcefully closing his right hand, tearing it in multiple ways, his fingers splitting apart, his hand looking more like an unsolved puzzle as he looks to beat Kazuto into unconsciousness. That's enough. Kitsune appears, grabbing Joseph in a chokehold, as Ivy uses her Shinto whip to bind him away from Kazuto, while Cello has Kazuto attached by his wires, whilst Zyla has Kazuto by hammer point. End of chapter 12.